Next time you're found with your chin on the ground, there's a lot to be learned. So look around, just look around. Just what makes that little old ant think he'll move that rubber tree plant? Anyone knows an ant can't move a rubber tree plant, 'cause he's got high hopes, he's got high hopes, he's got high apple pie in the sky hopes. So anytime you're getting low, instead of letting go, just remember that ant, remember, and oops, there goes another rubber tree. Oops, there goes another rubber tree. Oops, there goes another rubber tree plant. Now just remember it when troubles call and your back's to the wall. There's a lot to be learned. That wall could fall. That wall could fall. Once there was a silly old ram, thought he'd punch a hole in a dam. No one could make that ram scram. He kept butting that dam, 'cause he had high hopes. He had high hopes. He had high apple pie in the sky hopes. So anytime you're feeling bad, instead of feeling sad, just remember that ram, remember, and oops, there goes a billion kilowatt. Oops, there goes a billion kilowatt. Oops, there goes a billion kilowatt. Troubles go by when your head's in the sky and you're living your life with high hopes, with high hopes.
High hopes. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Haas, President of Grand Valley State University. And before we begin today, I would ask all of us to share a moment of silent reflection on the significance of this day. Thank you. It is my great honor to welcome you here today to this memorial for Bill Seidman. To Sally, your children, your grandchildren, we thank you for the privilege of being your hosts. I'm joined today in that duty by Kate Pugh Walters, the chair of the Grand Valley State University's Board of Trustees, the chair first occupied by Bill Seidman, who held it longer than anyone else. It's wholly fitting that we honor him today here at Grand Valley State University, the university that he insisted to be created. And as we know, Bill was a very insistent fellow. It's no exaggeration to say that without Bill Seidman's persistence, we would be honoring him in a much different location, for Grand Valley wouldn't even exist. For indeed, he was one of the architects of Grand Valley State University. So let me start. While you may not know much about two early 19th century architects, Daniel Burnham was from Chicago, and Willis Polk hailed from San Francisco. But you may know their work, which includes Burnham's Union Station in Washington, D.C., and Polk's Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. It is reported that at Polk's funeral service, Burnham shared this noteworthy advice. Quote, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble, logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we're gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember that our sons and grandsons and granddaughters are going to do things that would stagger us. Let your watchword be order, your beacon beauty. Think big," unquote. Think Bill Seidman, Grand Valley's grand architect. We have us today some very special guests who knew him best and who will be ably to reminisce about Bill. Rich DeVos, who served with Bill on Grand Valley's board. Don Lubbers, Grand Valley's president emeritus. Burge Watkins, a longtime family friend. Roger Porter, who served under Bill at the FDIC, and Sue Herrera of CNBC. Bill's last and probably most visible posting. And we will also have a chance to hear Bill in his own words. So again, welcome to Grand Valley State University. It's now my great pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Bill and Sally's son, Mr. Tom Seidman. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I know so many of you out there. It's really fantastic. First, I would like to thank President Haas and Chair Walters and the Board of Trustees, all of the people here at Grand Valley that worked so hard to put this memorial together and have clearly done such a fantastic job. I want to thank Terry Losey. I want to thank particularly Mary Beth Wardrop. Where are you, Mary Beth? I know your guys are down there. So, way up there. Who is your, as you know, your director of development, but who you may not know was a babysitter for our family for 3 summers down in Macatawa. So she's known us all a long time. I'd like to thank all of the faculty and the students from Grand Valley for being here today to honor our father. Thank you for taking your time off from, I'm sure, is a busy class schedule that you just started. And I'd especially like to thank all of the family members, all of my cousins, my uncle and my aunt that have come really from all over the country to be here, and to all of the original FOBs, the Friends of Bill, who have also come from all parts of the country to be here to honor and celebrate him today. So thank you all very much for being here. My only regret is that we are missing the one guy who would have enjoyed this day more than anybody else in this room. As many of you know, there was nothing that my dad liked more than a good party, and particularly if it was for him. He loved being with old friends. He loved being with his family. He loved music. He loved Michigan. He would come back here as often as he could. And as much as anything, he loved Grand Valley. I asked him once what his proudest accomplishment was. And this is in a life of a lot of accomplishments, as you will hear today. And he said without hesitation that helping to found this university was his greatest accomplishment. So I think that's a pretty extraordinary thing. So I think it's important today that since he can't be here, that we enjoy this day in his stead, that we enjoy this beautiful late summer day and the chance to see old friends, that we make a few jokes, that we have a few drinks. There's a rumor that somebody put a bottle of famous grouse in my briefcase, so see me at the reception. And I think it's important that we celebrate. I can assure you that if Bill Seidman was here today, that's what he would be doing. There's no question about it. So let's roll the video.
Bill Seidman accomplished much in his life. He earned a Bronze Star during World War II. He founded businesses in West Michigan. Seidman was a leader who worked with leaders, including governors and presidents.
Today, the CNBC family lost one of our own, former FDIC Chairman William Seidman, who most recently served as the chief commentator for CNBC.
His death rocked the financial world, where he had such an impact.
I think everybody loved Bill because you knew you had a person of tremendous warmth, good feeling, smart, really trying to serve his country.
And it rocked his friends and colleagues in his longtime home of West Michigan.
Friends thought he was indestructible. What is indestructible is the long legacy he leaves behind.
He was certainly a man who accomplished an awful lot throughout his life. He was one of the original founders of Grand Valley State University.
Just a few months before he died, Bill shared his story of his role in founding Grand Valley State University, something he said is one of his crowning achievements.
We didn't have a public four-year college in our town, and I read a report by Russell which said that because of that, the youth in our area were going to college at a lower rate than almost any place in the state. So I said, this is not good for the city, it's not good for the economy, it's not good for the young people, so I think I'll see if I can do something about it. I took action. I asked about 10 people to lunch on Friday at the Pantland Hotel, as it was then, now the Amway. And when I got them all together, I said, I know most of us are not used to having a drink at lunch, but I'd like you all to have a drink on me, because then I want to talk to you about something. And then I said, I think this city is one of the most wonderful cities that I've been in, and I've been in quite a few, but it really lacks something, and that is public higher education. And I think we all ought to get together and see if we can bring it to Grand Rapids. And then we started having meetings with all kinds of organizations. Anybody would listen to us, and I would play High Hopes, the song High Hopes, the ant moving a rubber tree plant. And then we would tell them about this and ask them for their support. So we entertained people at our house, usually a couple times a week. To start with, we didn't ask anybody for money. We just asked them for their support, particularly with the legislature and with the governor. And we had to convince them that this was going to be a great thing for the community. and particularly that it was going to be very good for the economy of the community as well as for the young people. But by and large, it was terrific support by the business community and the business leaders. And within about 18 months, we had built up enough support to go down to Lansing and start asking for a charter. And then we had to take a bill and get it through the committees. And in the House, I think it was, we got through by one vote. We were diligent. We really worked at it. And then eventually, the state, you said, you can have a charter if you raise $1 million to give to the state and buy a campus for the university. Then we got into fundraising. I mean, we were not only raising money, but it was on a promise. It was clearly not something we could show them in bricks and mortar, but we got terrific support from the banks, from the big industries like Steelcase and others. We got the labor unions supported us, and we had sell a brick, and we sold a brick to each citizen who would give us $1, and we finally got up to $1 million. But it wasn't easy. It took a lot of people, a lot of work to get there.
I officially dedicate and break the ground for the construction of the Grand Valley State College.
It was there because the community had supported it. A lot of people had their money in it, and therefore it got started with far greater community input and support than I think most institutions do, which don't start with a community movement. I believe that it would become a major university. 25,000 was on the top side. I feel wonderful about it. I've had a great life. I've worked for 3 presidents of the United States. I've been in major business. There's nothing that I've done in life that gives me the satisfaction of seeing how Grand Valley State University is delivering on its promise to the Western Michigan area.
I'd like to welcome again to the podium President Haas.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I have some very exciting news to share with you at this point. As you know, Rich and Helen have had a very close relationship with Bill and Sally and the Seidman family for many, many years. Rich has shared with me that he and Helen DeVos have made a significant gift to the Seidman College of Business because of their long friendship with the Seidman family and their confidence and appreciation for Grand Valley State University. Rich and Helen would like us to do something that will directly memorialize Bill and have a lasting impact for our West Michigan community. They feel we should hold up the Seidman legacy very high, with high hopes for all of the generations to see and to learn from. We at Grand Valley State University are moved and overwhelmed, and will keep the memory of Bill Seidman and his accomplishments alive and always with us. Please join me in thanking Rich and Helen for their generosity. Thank you. Now let me turn the podium back over to Tom. Tom?
Thank you, Tom. My dad was actually born right here in Grand Rapids. I don't know if not a lot of you knew that. And he grew up sailing on Reed's Lake. He went to East Grand Rapids High School. He was a star quarterback on the football team. And that's also where he started dating a very beautiful young freshman named Sally Berry, even though he was already a senior. Scandalous. And 3 years later, they were married in the Boston Naval Shipyard, the day before my father shipped out for 2 years of duty on a destroyer in the heart of World War II. I am delighted to note that my father made it back in one piece. I wouldn't be here if he didn't. And I'm especially happy to say that that beautiful young freshman is now the beautiful young great-grandmother who is with us here today, my mom, Sally Seidman. When the war ended, Dad finished school and he went to work for the family accounting firm, which was called Seidman and Seidman at that point. And my dad liked everything about the job except for the accounting part. He could not stand adding and subtracting numbers. But he did love business, and one of the companies that he was assigned to work with was a tiny little startup that was being run out of the basement of a couple of guys in Ada. And they had this crazy idea of selling soap. It was actually an organic soap. This is back in 1959. Selling soap door to door. Dad did not last long as an accountant. They bumped him up to manager pretty quickly. But the two soap guys ended up doing pretty well. And they never even had to leave Ada. It is my honor to introduce one of those men to you today, the co-founder of the Amway Corporation and one of my father's oldest friends, Mr. Rich DeVos.
Thank you, everybody, and on behalf of Helen and myself, we are honored to continue an old tradition of trying to keep this school good and making it better. Bill had often talked of a Bill Seidman building, and that's what we want to do for the Seidman School of Business. And that's planning is underway, and it's going to be a tribute and an honor to him. And a pleasure to our whole family as well. The significance of this man is going to be amplified by many people today. You have a whole group of people behind me that know him well, who lived with him in many places and many circumstances. But Helen and I, first of all, today want to extend our sympathy to the family, Sally, and to all the kids, and to all the good times we've had together. Don will talk to you about this college and its history, I'm sure. And the CNBC people will tell you about his relationships there, and Porter will tell you about the FDIC, and Burge will tell you about all the rest. I'm sure. And they will have a lot of stories, and if we're lucky, we'll be out of here in time to eat. There are so many stories that we could go on, and so we have to. I haven't been assigned to do this, but I have chosen to just talk about the personal side with Bill and with Sally. And so, Tom, where did you get all that hair? It was kind of shocking when I looked at the two pictures. But Bill became our first accountant, right? Our only accountant. There was a little period in which we strayed, but we got back in line pretty quick. But I remember some of the things that Bill shared with us and told us and advised us and counseled us on. And they were a part of the making of Amway, and so he can take a part tribute and credit for what's going on out there in Ada. And we were neighbors. Their home was always open. It wasn't as if it was a business relationship. It was a friendship, and we'd go over and play on his whatever we called those things in those days, outdoor winter small tennis court with fence all around it. There's a word for that, but I'm stumbling at the platform tennis, I think we called it. Is that right? Anyway. I look around and I feel like all of you should be up here talking. And I feel like I'm sort of representing you because your stories are just as good or better than mine. Your memories are better than mine. I hope. Because we've been allowed to live together a long time and to see all of this happen right in front of our eyes. And so every time we come here, we just kind of, can you imagine what's happened here? And we share the joy with everybody else. But anyway, let's get back to that other little story of Bill. And so after playing a little platform, we'd run over their house, and the house was always open, and Sally was always there to either play with us or greet us, and it became a very special relationship. Bill, at one point when he was going to go to Washington, I said to him, "Why would you do that?" And he said, "Because I've been asked for one thing, but," he said, "because the president needs me. I can make a contribution to our country. And besides," he says, "you better start paying attention to what goes on down there. Because they can make or break you. And you better start to contribute and play an active role in politics to be a player." And I took his advice at that time, and I decided to be a player. And we began to become politically active. And so we pursued the proper party. And a party that was consistent with Bill's belief in people. It was recognition of people's ability to make great things happen and solve their own problems and lead their own lives. And that's what this school is all about, and that's what we're all about. And so it was a common relationship, but we did pay attention to what went on down there. He was a neighbor. He was an advisor. But we were friends in that we did a lot of things together. We traveled together. Recently, I was in Nantucket, where Bill and Sally had one or two or three different homes. We first went there when we had a boat, a 100-foot yacht, and Bill said, "Bring it up to Nantucket, and we'll have a party, of course." And so we went to Nantucket, and he kept saying, "Don't tell anybody about this place. It's a secret." And it is a fabulous place, and we've kept the Democrats over on Martha's pretty well, and it's survived pretty good over there. But we were there again this summer, because every summer we went there with Bill and Sally, and they often traveled with us, and they'd come on the boat all day or some days, and they'd eat with us, and we'd visit and reminisce and talk. It was a special time, because Sally was met by one of our crew on the street, and I didn't even know she was up and around, and she said, and the captain's wife came back and said, "Mrs. Seidman, I saw her on the street. I invited her over." And Sally and a couple of kids came over, and we had tea that afternoon, and they held her up in her wheelchair so she could see the city. And I thought back to the previous years when we had been there, and Bill and Sally would come over, and she'd be in her wheelchair. And in fact, the last boat we had, we built an extra wide ramp for her to come up and down on, because we knew next year we'd be there. We need that for her. We did use it for her. And that was a very special time for us. But then she said, there's a memorial today, or tomorrow, in Nantucket for Bill. And so Helen and I were privileged to be at this memorial. And I got to report a little bit to you and to Tom and some of the other family members who weren't there what a great time it was. And a gal by the name of Nancy lived next door to Bill and Sally. Nancy is the preacher in the local church that Bill and Sally attended periodically. When I was there, he went there. And this Nancy was a nice lady, and she had been there, became their neighbor, and so she would eat with them and drink with them and meditate with them. And she talked about Bill's spiritual journey a little, which I found very interesting. And she said, you know, when he first came, he was agnostic. He didn't believe in God, and gradually, as we would visit, we would talk about it year after year. And gradually, he finally acknowledged there certainly was a God and that he needed a God. And he gradually came along, and then he'd start to say, when we'd come over for dinner, he'd say, why don't you ask a blessing? And Nancy would ask a blessing for all of them. And then one day I said to Bill, why don't you ask the blessing? And then Bill asked the blessing. And she said that was my sign of how far he had come, that he could do that and wanted to do that. And I was reminded how several nights on our boat, because as we gather together for meals, we always have a prayer, and I would ask everybody around the table to take turns, and I always was reluctant to ask Bill, but one time I said, Bill, how about you? And he said, I'd love to. And Bill offered a blessing, and it was very nice and very well done. And we had known and seen him progress in that regard as well. And that was the personal side you saw. But Sally was the strength. And what we saw in those days was Bill caring for her in such a special way. The people at Nantucket reminisced about the Bill they knew. They didn't know anything about Grand Valley. I had to get up and tell them what a great school this was and what a great place it was, and that this was a side you don't know about this guy. You know him as a funny little guy with a funny hat he wears. He always had a crazy hat and his boots and his fishing pole. And he knew where all the crabs were and where all the clams were, and he knew where the best berries were on the island. And he said, come with me and I'll show you the West Blackberry Patch. And he said, come along with me and we'll go catch some lobster. And then he'd cook them up for everybody. And they knew him as a man of the country, as a man who knew how to fish and cook and party and play and visit, and say, we had to be reminded of the significance of this man. And here he was as a big wheel in Washington, but all we knew was this old pickup truck he had, and it was usually dirty, and he had a few fishing poles in the back end, and he had a garage filled with junk, and he had no parking sign in front, so nobody would park in front, but he never parked in there anyway. It was just filled with his junk and his things of living on an island. First time we went there, it was with Dick Gillette, and Dick Gillette was there with his kids, and Doug and Dan and Dick were all young. And were you there, Doug? Seidman used to throw passes to everybody. There was always a little nudie group over on the island, and Seidman would always pass the ball out where they were so the boys could catch the ball out there. And when it was their turn to pass, they did the same for him. But it was our first together time that summer on Nantucket, and we never stopped coming back. And I don't think they ever stopped coming back either. But it was that kind of a relationship that we shared. The people in Nantucket were honored to have such a distinguished citizen. But to him, he was a regular guy. And that's the way we remember him, don't we? We look today and we'll talk today about all of his achievements, but those of us who knew him well, remember him as just a friend. he went to Yale and he went to Harvard and he was a big guy in Washington and all these places, but he was never anything more than Bill. A guy who cared about the rest of us. He was our accountant, but he never acted like he was superior or better or smarter. He made this kid who never went to college feel important in the process. And so our lives were enriched. We went to Peter Island one time on the boat and we were swimming, and we hadn't walked Peter Island at that time, and Bill found a sign floating in the water off the beach, and it had signs, Peter Island, lots for sale, and he picked it up and hauled it back to the boat, and many years later he gave it back to me. He said, you hadn't bought the island at that time, but I had a feeling you were going to, so I took this sign home to save it for you. Just thinking ahead and thinking big and figuring, yeah, that's the way it's going to go. So he was a fan and a supporter. But I will remember him most watching him in those years come down the street with Sally, pushing her wheelchair. And when we'd go on a cruise, we'd say, Bill, do you want one of your kids to come along to help with Sally or anything? And he said, nope. He said, I'll take care of her. And all the personal things that were needed and were taken care of, and Bill would take care of it all. And when we go on our little dinghy for a boat ride, Sally would always go along with all of us. And when we went to a town in Kennebunkport one time, and Bill was the one who pushed her around town as we went art shopping. And then President Bush was there at home. He said, come on over for lunch, and we all went over there. And Bill said, I wonder if you'll remember how when he tried to put me out of the FTC, I said, no, I'm going to stay. He said, they put me in here for 6 years, I'm staying. And so Bush didn't remember any of that anyway. But he said, Bush would always be nice. He'd come over for lunch, he says, but at 2 o'clock I go fishing. You can stay as long as you like. And so our life is rich, and our community is enriched. But we have been enriched as a people to know a man such as this, a Renaissance man. He wore khaki pants and a blue blazer and a red tie with a spot on it. But he was a friend, and all the other things you're going to hear about in a moment. We thank God for Bill's presence in our lives, for his friendship. But I salute him, and I salute you, Sally, because that was a good team, and we had a lot of fun together, and you were very special in our life. Take care.
Well, you heard the story about the founding of Grand Valley, and particularly about that song, High Hopes. What you don't know is that not only did they play that song at the meetings that they went to, and played it at the countless meetings, gatherings that we had at our house, but my dad used to play it after everybody left, and the next day. So I think it's a tribute to my mother and my sisters that they all didn't run out of the room screaming after they heard that song again for the 950th time. I have to share a quick story about the early days of Grand Valley. And I remember with that video that they had of the opening ceremonies, I remember being out there watching that happen. There was an old farm that was on the land here, right just about where these buildings are right now, that they had to clear in order to start construction on the college, and they were going to bulldoze the buildings, and the local gun club came to the early founders and said, we'd like to help with that process. Could we, take a shot at helping to clear those buildings? So they said, okay, sure. So the next day, these guys pulled up with a Spanish-American War Hollister cannon and a German anti-tank gun and proceeded to take aim at the old farm. And their first shot out of the cannon, they shot at the silo. Well, you know, there's one of these old silos and how the cement gets soft. The shell went right straight through the silo toward M45. And there was an old farmer that was driving his tractor down the road, and the shell went off right over the highway just as he was going by. He spun that tractor around, and I don't think anybody knew that a tractor could go that fast in the opposite direction, heading back toward Allendale. There is one man that is probably as responsible, or maybe even more responsible, for the incredible success and growth of Grand Valley, even than my father. He was the second president of Grand Valley. He became president in 1969 at the age of 37, which made him one of the youngest university presidents in the country. And when he retired in 2001, he had served for 32 years here, and that made him, this time, the longest-serving state university leader in the country. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you, or reintroduce to most of you, Grand Valley's own President Emeritus, Mr. Don Lubbers.
It certainly is fitting that we honor Bill on this day, which is now being proclaimed a day of national service. On a June morning in 1968, Bill Seidman walked into my office at Central College, and my life changed forever. I think the experience was shared by many. Bill was a person of vision and action, and when his life touched yours, things changed. He had a way of engaging, encompassing, and setting the agenda. Some of us remember the Sundays, which Rich referred, when Bill and Sally gathered their families, friends, and business associates for an afternoon of paddle tennis that inevitably extended into dinner at their Buttrick Street home, a sauna, followed by a dip in the enclosed swimming pool. The Seidmans were always engaging people and providing everyone a good time. It was easy to be caught up in Bill's orbit. He was always doing something that was important to the landscape in which he was working. And there was always a quotient of fun in the doing for those associated with him. Bill kept moving through society. He was a 20th century Renaissance man. Being an accounting executive was a natural first. Being in politics was inevitable for a public-spirited activist like Bill. Creating art and bringing one of the world's most noted artists to his hometown was done with an intensity that might make someone who didn't know him think art and art patronage was his main endeavor. He learned the thrust and parry of White House infighting and carried that knowledge with him to the FDIC chairmanship, where his service to the nation is noteworthy in the annals of American finance. He served corporate America briefly as a tycoon of copper. He helped save New York City financially. He became an academic dean. I was not close to his daily operations at the time, but I can speculate on how the faculty dealt with this rapidly moving, objective-driven man. He liked to cook for friends. From steaks to clam bakes, he excelled. He played tennis from childhood, beyond the time when his shoulders and knees felt comfortable with the game. He was not much for long periods of quiet introspection or convoluted discussions, but he was capable of brilliant intellectual insight into any issue or situation that claimed his attention. In any task or time of relaxation, his mind and his hands worked well. He was an author. He loved Dixieland music. He was peripatetic, carrying his economic and financial knowledge and counsel throughout the world. He became the wise voice on CNBC to all Americans seeking to know and understand the economy. What a man! Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "He is great who is what he is from nature and who never reminds us of others." Bill was one of a kind, exceeding others in so many ways. He often said that founding Grand Valley was his greatest accomplishment. I, of course, was pleased and the right person to hear that from him. He lived and achieved on a national and international stage, so such a statement could be considered a compliment without really holding him to it. But I've concluded that he really meant it. He was a man known for speaking directly and honestly, so I believe what he directly said to me. With Bill as leader, he, Sally, and their friends worked as a team to start a college. The synergy and success of their efforts, the nurturing of personal relationships during the process, likely gave Bill as rewarding a public and personal journey as he ever had, even though in the future what he did and said rose to national significance. It is, however, in the product, not the process, where the true satisfaction lies. What a fine institution the Seidman's College has become. In so many ways, it surpasses its competition, and Bill enjoyed that. He liked to win, as all smart, ambitious people do, and he wanted his friends to be winners. He was a mentor to many, a good influence on more, and was committed to the win-win philosophy. Yet you cannot live where he lived or played where he played without knowing how high the stakes, and sometimes how bitterly fought after the positions of favor and dominance. I come from a tradition where funeral sermons were often used to shape up the living more than honor the dead. As Thomas Mann wrote, a man's dying is more the survivor's affair than his own. In suggesting to those who work and educate at Grand Valley that they keep their founder's vision always before them, I come close to that tradition. High academic quality, belief in the liberal arts core, innovation and creativity, service to the community, and commitment to a broad program from science, arts, humanities, professional studies to athletics are the substance of Bill's vision for Grand Valley. Few people remember that in the Constitutional Convention of 1963, Bill was an advocate and the leader of the move to give Michigan's universities constitutional autonomy. Once it was determined that no centralized bureaucracy would control the universities, the stage was set for the creative and independent development of the institution he founded. The legacy of constitutional autonomy was his greatest gift to higher education in Michigan. I am thrilled by Rich and Helen's announcement. Here where Bill helped build a community and a university, The litany of his good deeds will always be with us. The L. William Seidman Business Building will remind us of what he contributed. But more important, it will be home to a fast-moving, always innovative, constantly improving Seidman College of Business. Just like its namesake, it will be in perpetual motion. Bill was the best of the 20th century. His accomplishments and personal characteristics were significant enough for his life to be a symbol for the events in what is called the American century. He fought in the World War. He was educated in the 20th century tradition. He helped shape a 20th century city, and he participated in the education, economy, and politics that characterized the century. He was transforming into a 21st century man, but mortality has its way. These are times when memories predominate. Family members have the most and the most important, but all of us have them. It's time for us to select a memory and savor it. I remember that no one except my father gave me better advice in times of stress than Bill. It may seem unusual to think about the words of a poet who lived in both the 17th and 18th centuries, Alexander Pope, in an attempt to find a fitting epitaph for such a 20th century man. Yet this well-known verse does it for me. Honor and shame from no condition arise. Act well your part, there all honor lies. Bill acted well on life's stage and lived and died an honorable man. The Navy hymn, Eternal Father Strong to Save, is traditionally performed at funerals for individuals who are associated with or have served in the Navy. It was performed at the funeral of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and as President John F. Kennedy's body was carried up the steps of the U.S. Capitol to lie in state. Bill Seidman answered his nation's call during World War II and received a Bronze Star for his service in the Navy. We honor him now with a performance of the Navy hymn played by the university's brass quintet.
I'm going to be honest with you. I do not know how our next speaker got on the program. They gave me his resume to read for this introduction, and I'm just going to read it to you because I have no idea how he managed to accomplish any of this. He is currently a partner in Encompass Real Estate Advisors. He is a senior advisor for the Endowment for the United States Institute of Peace, and he is the director and incoming president of the Land Trust of Virginia. He has served in the past as the staff assistant to the president in the Office of Economic Affairs in the White House, as the deputy assistant secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and as the National Investor Outreach Director for the Resolution Trust Corporation. However, I have known him since he was 3 years old. I know where his real talents lie. I know him as a skinny little kid who for years bore an uncanny resemblance to Alfalfa in the Little Rascals comedies. Just take a look when he comes up. He knows how to pack a mean firecracker into a rotten crab apple and then time it so that it's just about 2 feet over your head when it goes off. Kind of like that farmer out on M45. And he was particularly good at sneaking up behind our babysitters at Makatawa when they were lying on the beach sunning and they had their, they were lying down and they had their bikini tops undone, sneaking up behind them and pouring cold water on their backs. And they would kind of go, like that. You remember Mary Beth? Huh? We do. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my oldest friends and an associate of my father for many years, Mr. Burge Swift Watkins.
I think I got to quickly change my entire speech here today. No tough acts to follow, too. You've got two of the best presidents of any American college in America, one of the most successful businessmen on the planet. That's fabulous. So I'm very happy to be here today with Sally, Tom, Tracy, Sarah, Carrie, Meg, Robin, and their families, and so many old friends from Grand Rapids. I saw a lot of people on the way in, and there's friends from Washington and other parts of the country. Well, trying to consolidate a lifetime of great memories and hundreds of stories into a few short remarks is challenging. Our old friend Bill Seidman jammed a lot of life into those 88 years. And normally this would probably be a 3 or 4 hour conversation over a large bottle of famous Scotch, grouse Scotch, and all the seafood we could eat. Those were all Bill's favorites. Bill did so many diverse things. He was complex, fast-paced, brilliant, and a wonderful guy who led life to the fullest. He always had his wind to the back and the pedal to the metal. He never stopped. He was always on the move. And I think even when he was sitting still, the wheels were still turning. I think Hurricane Bill might have been a good moniker. I also like to describe Bill as an organizer of great adventures in family, government, business, education, media, sports, art, and home hospitality. So today I thought I'd quickly run through a list of the many adventures he lived, the many hats he wore, and interject a story or two here and there. Well, my first memories of Bill go back to when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and it wasn't long after that I had my first taste of his management style. We were little kids at the Lake Michigan cottages, and Bill paid us a penny for each housefly we could kill in his cottage. It took a long time. Well, later, Bill got me and the other boys to sweep sand off his driveway and trade for firecrackers. Now, Tom alluded to that. At 11 years old, we would do anything for a cherry bomb, an M80, or a string of black cats. Tom and I became famous for blowing up dead carp on the beach, thanks to Bill. One of his specialties, folks. Well, Bill made work look like fun. He told me early on that Tom Sawyer was his management role model. And ever since those days, I've worked for Bill, I've worked with Bill, and recently I had a chance to have Bill working for me, and that was very special. I like that. Bill had many roles, starting with family. He was the husband of the ever-wonderful, stunningly beautiful, and always popular Sally Berry Seidman. Father of 6 terrific kids who are all here today. He was an uncle of the Berrys and the Bryants. They're here. And he had dozens of honorary nieces and nephews, including my kids. Grandfather, 11 grandchildren, recently great-grandfather of 2, and he had endless friends like so many of you here today. Well, we've been through some of his stuff. He was a student at East Grand Rapids High School, later at Dartmouth. He attended Harvard Law School, went to the Michigan Business School, certainly was a Navy veteran, the accountant with BDO Seidman. He was also chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and probably many of you, and some were involved, he organized one of the great communication companies in Grand Rapids, which is now Channel 13, WZZM. Bill's well known as a presidential advisor and White House senior staff member under President Ford. I think had President Ford won, he might have become Secretary of the Treasury or Chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Roger Porter and I worked for Bill in the Office of Economic Affairs, and he's got a few stories he's going to tell you. Later, as chairman of the FDIC and the RTC, he did a tremendous job for our country in a time of great financial crisis. He was perfect for that job. At the time, I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. I don't really know how that happened either, but he called up and he said, why don't you get out of cows and food stamps and come over here and help the RTC with major real estate investors? And yes, sir, I did immediately. I was on my way. I remember his days as a corporate executive. He was vice chairman of Phelps Dodge. He was a board director and advisor, literally dozens and dozens of companies. He was a consultant to Morgan Stanley and the World Bank and many others, the publisher of Bank Director magazine. He's an author and writer, and Full Faith and Credit is still a great book, very timely today. Bill was a public speaker, as you know. He made thousands of speeches. In recent years, he was in great demand because of the start of this new financial crisis. And I had dinner with him probably 8 or 9 months ago, and he said he was pretty tired. Bill never really said he was tired very often. He'd flown in from California on the red eye a couple days earlier, and he gave 3 speeches that day and then appeared on Kudlow and Company. And I asked him, why in the world would you give 3 speeches in one day? And he said, they paid me. They paid him well, too. It was mentioned that he was a politician. He was a candidate for Auditor General with George Romney, later became a financial advisor to the governor. And at one point, he flew up to Mackinac Island and took Tommy and I along with him, and we got to sleep on the porch of the governor's mansion. And we were joined by a young fellow named Mitt Romney. Remember that one? He was almost a candidate for U.S. Senate and Congress. I think he would have been a fabulous senator. And you may not know this, he was even mentioned as a possible vice presidential candidate for Ross Perot. Bill was an entrepreneur and investor. He was involved with the startup of dozens of businesses. He had some winners, he had some losers, but he always loved the challenge. However, he told me once he turned 80, he made it clear that he was not making any long-term investments. Bill was a media star at CNBC. He was everybody's wise old uncle, and there was apparently a ratings jump every Tuesday. And I think this was a combination of his straight talk, his famous predictions, and his attractive and articulate colleagues, Sue, Aaron, Trish, and Melissa. He liked those. He liked the women there. He was a movie producer, along with his son Tom. They have a classic or two. Sounds like another one in the works. He was a big movie fan, and you probably don't know this either. He held the Guinness World Record for watching the movie Gigi more than anybody else in the world. And we predicted it came to the reason was that because Maurice Chevalier in that song, Thank Heavens for Little Girls. Bill was an international traveler. He and Sally saw a lot of the world. I took 5 trips to Asia with him in recent years, and it was very interesting because of his FDIC activities. He was considered a big hero over there. Japan considered him one of America's living treasures and an icon. Well, we all know Bill as an educator and teacher. He taught at Wagner College in Staten Island very early on, later at Michigan State. He started the Washington Campus program about 32 years ago, and Grand Valley was one of the founding members of that. He's a business school dean, and at Arizona State they have the L. William Seidman Research Institute. And, of course, we're here, which is his biggest educational adventure, Grand Valley. Founder, organizer, former chairman. Back a number of years ago, during the time when he started Grand Valley, he was a community leader in Grand Rapids. He's always been a philanthropist. He supported youth organizations, educations, and many other causes. Now, he was an athlete and a sportsman. That was his big part of his life. Football player in high school. Fantastic tennis player. He and Sally were a very formidable doubles team. He liked sailing and boating. Bill liked to sail small boats on Lake Michigan. Our parents didn't like us going out with him, but we did anyways. He had one of the first fiberglass boats, and he called it My Gal Sal. We all did water skiing, learned how to fish, things like that. And later, I know he really enjoyed yachting with Rich and Helen DeVos. He was a hiker. He and Sally hiked in Colorado, California, New Mexico, and the Shenandoahs. And as a skier, he organized one of the greatest sports adventures in Michigan history, Thornapple Slopes in Ada. Now, I know some of you skied there, and it was a great activity for all of us. And, afterwards it was hamburgers and swimming at the Seidman's house. Bill was a cross-country skier. He donated the 400-acre Seidman Park in Ada, which has been a great success. He was a jogger, a platform tennis player, a golfer. He loved to snorkel, particularly in Eleuthera. He was also a swimmer. He had that little pool in the back of his house in Georgetown. And I remember he'd come in and he'd tell people, I swam 50 laps this morning. And I'd go, you know, that pool is about 10 feet long, but I never said anything. Never told him. Bill was a horseman. He loved to be a cowboy in New Mexico. But if we go back a while, he was a polo player at Kentry. And despite what you may have seen in recent years, Bill really did have a sense of fashion back then. He was a cool dude in the 50s and 60s. He was kind of a combination of a young Marlon Brando and Yul Brynner. He drove a 56 Ford Thunderbird convertible. He had the bald head, the Ray-Bans, the polo shirt with the collar up and the tail out, jodhpurs and riding boots, and he topped it off by a cigar and a cold beer. I think Ralph Lauren could have recruited him right then. Later, he was a bicyclist, and he set new standards for bike wear elegance. He had the Greek fisherman's hat, the Grand Rapids police jacket, the overflowing briefcase, and baggy pants with rubber bands around the ankles. And he looked very sharp as he wove his way through D.C. traffic, dodging metro buses on the way to the FDIC or later to the CNBC studio. Well, Bill was a gardener. He always liked planting things, and he liked to see things grow, somewhat of a metaphor for his life. He was a dog lover. He didn't like all his dogs, and not all his dogs loved him. One of his favorite was the Irish Wolfhound Proxmire. He named it after the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee during the FDIC days. And after a very tough day of testimony, he could go home and yell, Proxmire, sit, stay, lie down, roll over. He loved that. His musical talent, he loved music, but his musical talent was pretty much limited to the spoons. But he loved jazz and Dixieland. I think part of this is the Louis Armstrong Auditorium. And Bill liked to dance, too. He had a lot of fun doing that. Bill he said he was an artist at heart. And he actually did have quite a bit of talent. I think his great inspirations were Sally, and later he was personally inspired by Alexander Calder. And as you know, Bill and Sally were instrumental in bringing the Calder sculpture to Grand Rapids. He loved to make mobiles out of Sally's good bamboo curtains. I think there was some frustration with that. Metal rods, later found objects, and he was an irrepressible doodler. I think some of his doodles probably could have made good paintings, and somebody else like me may have to do that, but I think they were pretty terrific. Well, Bill was a homeowner, and just to complicate his life, he and Sally had houses all over the place, and these were the sites of great entertainment and culinary adventures. Bill was a provider, and I don't just mean a financial provider. He had that well taken care of, but he was a food provider. He was a farmer and a cattleman. He had vegetable gardens and Black Angus at the farm in Ada. He was a rancher in New Mexico. He could cook almost anything on the grill, especially steaks, but if you were looking for a full meal, you hope Sally was there. When we were kids, on Sunday mornings, he always cooked blueberry pancakes, and he'd take care of the 6 Seidman kids, and there'd be another 14 kids lined up outside the door for their second breakfast, and he took care of all of us. He loved doing that. There were the famous 4th of July parties at Macatawa, and Sally and Bill brought lobsters and clams in from Maine. They were fabulous. In Washington, there were the seafood orgies at the Seidman House. Bill would go down to the Main Avenue Fish Market, which is in Washington, D.C., and just to buy about everything he could find, bring it home, sometimes on his bicycle, which was quite a sight, and he and Sally would cook a fantastic meal. Bill and Sally even had Alice of Alice's Restaurant cater a fantastic party at their Georgetown house. And in Nantucket, he used to hunt for mussels, dig for clams, pick berries. He'd go surf casting for bluefish, and for him it was free food, and it was great. Well, the best times, I think, with Bill centered on food, drink, conversation with great friends. And we all know who led the conversation. During and after meals, he loved to talk of old times, future plans, the next project, the state of the world economy, and his favorite Washington political friends, and a few enemies. And I could go on and on. You know, this is one where the memories keep flooding back over the past few months, and each memory is a story, and there are literally thousands of stories. Let me leave you with one memorable image I think needs to go into the Seidman catalog of images. Carrie and I and Bill were in Indonesia at the beach in Bali a couple years ago. Now, at one point, Bill was surrounded by about 8 local women selling beads and trinkets and any kind of legitimate service they could. Bill looked like a smiling Buddha in his bathing suit and T-shirt. He had a lady on each foot giving him a pedicure. 2 more ladies were on manicure duty, and another 4 were handling head, neck, and back massages. Now, Carrie and I were very worried about all this attention. It was just too many people. But, Bill looked really happy. He was very content, very relaxed. Well, I think we can easily remember Bill as an inspiring leader and motivator, an excellent manager, a straight-talking communicator, and a high-energy organizer of great adventures. He was strong, he could be tough, he could be provocative, yet he did it all with wit, wisdom, and charm. He had great character, but he was also a real character. He was eclectic, in some ways eccentric. He was mischievous, and if you look at the picture up there, when he got that twinkle in his eye and he got that slightly sideways grin, you knew something was up. He was going to say or do something funny. He had friends of all ages from all walks of life, including so many of you here today. And now those 88 years really were jam-packed, and they were great. Now, Bill certainly wouldn't want us to be sad. That's not his style. And that gets me back to famous grouse and seafood again. He would want us to eat, drink, be merry, and tell stories. And with that, I say cheers to you, Bill Seidman. Thanks for so many great times. Thanks for so many great adventures. And thanks for so many great memories.
I've come to the conclusion that my dad was actually three people. And he would just appear in different places at the same time, and it's amazing to hear that list. In 1973, I think, Vice President Spiro Agnew, some of you remember him, resigned, and President Nixon appointed Jerry Ford as his new vice president. And Mr. Ford found out that he needed a manager to help him come organize the office very quickly, and he called Bill Seidman. And that was Dad's first call to Washington, and in many ways, I think he never left. He loved it there. As you can imagine, in those days, he had his pick of any number of young men and women who wanted to work with him. And he chose as his assistant a former Rhodes Scholar who was actually interested in a teaching career, but he felt he should get some actual practical world experience before he started teaching. And knowing my dad, I'm sure he was in a complete agreement with that approach. That young man went on to serve as a deputy to my father for many years, both in the White House and later in the FDIC, and he later became an economic advisor to the president himself. He is currently the IBM Professor of Business and Government at Harvard University, and he is the Master of Dunsford House at Harvard as well. Mr. Roger Porter.
Each of us has special moments, places, and people in our life that we come to treasure. They include the birth of a son or a daughter, a spot of marvelous beauty where we feel great peace, and not least another person whose love or influence for good causes us to want to do our best and to be our best. Some people exert great influence through their example. Others extend influence through teaching. Still others do so as our friends and trusted colleagues. Many of those who exert influence through their example do so from positions of prominence, political, corporate, academic, and other leaders. Others, however, have great influence through the force of their character and personality, and through the strength of their vision. Bill Seidman, whose loss we mourn and whose life we have gathered to honor and celebrate, was quite simply one of the most singular individuals of his generation, a generation that Tom Brokaw has reminded us deserves the appellation the greatest. I have rarely been around anyone so committed to learning. Bill had a restless mind and spent every day of his life expanding his knowledge and horizon. He would want us to use this time to learn, and there is much we can and should learn from his life. As I have thought long and happily about our association, I have come to understand a little better those things that are most important in the years that we are allotted on this earth. We can learn much from his priorities and the traits Bill chose to elevate in his life. The qualities that he cultivated were many and varied: thoughtful, generous, wise, creative, determined, innovative, loyal, kind, compassionate, cheerful, firm, fair, curious, humble. The list goes on, just as it seemed like he would. Those who knew Bill well were invariably struck by his boundless energy. Early in his life, he slipped into high gear and stayed there for 88 years. He was shaped by the Great Depression and the Second World War, serving his country in the Navy in that epic conflict. He found and married a marvelous woman, Sally Berry, the light of his life. Together they raised 6 children and gave Tom, Tracy, Carrie, Sarah, Meg, and Robin much encouragement and support as they pursued a wide range of interests and activities. For Bill, his family was at the heart of his life. He followed in his father's footsteps in the world of accounting and became a true craftsman with meticulous attention to detail, a mastery of complex provisions, and an integrity that earned him great respect and admiration. But he was soon drawn to the intersection of government and business, to the world of public policy. He was in his life very much like another son of Grand Rapids, Gerald Ford. Both possessed those solid Midwestern virtues and never abandoned them, but instead kept refining them. When we spent time with Bill and Sally last January in Florida as we discussed the current economic events, we reflected on this situation Gerald Ford had inherited 3.5 decades earlier when he was thrust into the presidency under unprecedented circumstances in the wake of Watergate and Vietnam. During the 3 months before Gerald Ford took office, the wholesale price index increased at an annual rate of 37%, the most explosive inflation in U.S. history. Unemployment was rising. Real growth had ground to a halt. All presidents discover the value of sound advice and decision-making processes that illuminate for them the full range of relevant considerations and the true nature of the choices they and the country face. As elsewhere in life, real excellence is not accidental. Gerald Ford and the country benefited from the fact that the president had at his side an individual who did not seek the limelight, but who effectively molded an economic team that included William Simon, Alan Greenspan, James Lynn, Paul O'Neill, John Dunlop, Henry Kissinger, and Elliot Richardson, among others. As assistant to the president for economic affairs, Bill emerged as the quintessential honest broker. Some in the White House take advantage of their proximity to the president and utilize their position and access to push their own agenda. What Bill consistently did, day in and day out, was define differences, test assumptions, and ensure that the marketplace of ideas was free and fair. As well as anyone before, since, and I say this without fear of exaggerating his importance, he organized and orchestrated a process that shaped the administration's economic policies, and those policies broke the back of inflation, restored sustained economic growth, expanded trade, reformed regulation, and strengthened confidence. I had the privilege of observing this period of presidential history from the inside, and time will only permit me to draw attention to one lesson among many. On one major issue, when I took the decision memorandum into Bill's office for his signature, I informed him that the votes between the two leading options were evenly split, and asked where he wanted to be recorded. Many would have relished the position of voting last and seeking to push the decision in one direction or another. Bill smiled and, as he always did, declined the opportunity to be recorded. He had views, and the President sought those views in the meeting the following day. But the process of carefully balanced options papers over which he presided was one in which his role was to serve as the honest broker. His peers admired his ability to define issues, develop options, and evaluate consequences, but they also treasured his fairness and valued the integrity of the process which he oversaw. He earned the trust of the President and his colleagues. Sooner or later, we come to discover that trust is the foundation of great democracies and of great lives. During those years in the Ford White House, it was not all work and no play. Bill, ever the sportsman, loved to play tennis, yet he did not want to necessarily reveal to those who might see his schedule precisely what he was doing. So when time was set aside for tennis, his schedule simply read Green Conference, in honor of the green color of the tennis court surface. Following the 1976 election, we soon found ourselves out of office. We were walking together on a crowded street in Washington, getting jostled by the large crowd, and he turned to me with a smile on his face and said, "Obviously, they don't know who we once were." Well, he was comfortable in any situation because of his basic humility and his lack of pretension. Another powerful lesson flows from Bill's second high-level period of federal service as chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Much could be said about his managerial skill in attracting, motivating, and inspiring those within the FDIC who looked to him for leadership during a time of great stress. His general approach during those years is instructive. A pivotal accomplishment is how he reorganized the way the FDIC handled failed institutions. Rather than holding on to the assets of failed banks, he was driven by the belief that the government should get institutions and assets back into the private sector. This was a man who believed in markets. He displayed those most essential of qualities: a willingness to face reality and to make what changes were necessary during a time of crisis. His approach was that of an idealist without illusions. Bill treasured education, earning degrees from Dartmouth, Harvard, and the University of Michigan. He loved Grand Rapids and cherished this remarkable institution that he helped to found. As we were leaving the Ford administration, he extended an invitation to me to join him in teaching a course at the Seidman School on the relationship between business and government. It was a marvelous experience to teach alongside Bill. His mind was quick, he was always full of insights, and he listened to what others had to say and then helped them to refine their thinking. Among other things, we discovered the value of bringing students to Washington so that they could see the players and the places where policy is shaped firsthand. In the summer of 1977, we ran a pilot program with a number of students from Grand Valley State and a smattering of other schools. Persuaded that the idea was a good one, Bill determined that we would go national, putting together a consortium of great universities from all parts of the country. In retrospect, it is remarkable that so many first-rate institutions were willing to participate, from the Big Ten to the Pac-10, from the Ivy League to the Atlantic Coast Conference. And now, 3 decades later, the Washington campus stands tall, having survived and flourished. It has done so in large part because of the vision, tenacity, and leadership of a truly remarkable individual. And all these years, his beloved Sally was by his side. When the Washington campus first incorporated, she served as the organization's secretary, and in her marvelous way in the discussions in the living room of their home on 31st Street in Georgetown, she encouraged and suggested and left a lasting imprint on a grateful organization. The American Bankers Association last year honored Bill with its Lifetime Achievement Award. It was a fitting and well-deserved tribute. But that black tie event at the Pierre Hotel in New York remains fixed in my memory for his characteristic gesture that evening. He wanted to share the moment with his beloved Sally and with those who had served with him during his many incarnations over several decades. When he arose to accept the award, he called each of those who had worked with him by name and asked them to stand as he described the work they had done. He then observed that when one went to work for him, there was one rule: you do the work, I will take the credit. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Bill Seidman never asked those who worked for him to stay later or to put forth more effort than he did himself. He genuinely shared any credit that was due and accepted responsibility himself if things did not go well. His television commentary brought him much recognition and acclaim. He took it in stride and never succumbed to pride or arrogance. No one has had a finer mentor. No one has been blessed with a truer friend. He lived his life well and to the fullest. John Greenleaf Whittier, more than a century ago, wrote about those like Sally and Bill Seidman. All hearts grew warmer in the presence of one who gave freely for the love of giving, nor reaped for self the harvest sown. Thy greeting smile was pledge and prelude of generous deeds and kindly words. In thy large heart were fair guest chambers open to sunrise and the birds.
In 1991, a new business news channel called CNBC approached my father, and they asked him if he would be interested in doing some financial commentary. And it turned out to become one of his favorite jobs. No matter where he was in the country, and he traveled a lot right up to the end, on Thursday mornings, he and the folks at CNBC would figure out where the nearest satellite uplink was, and he would make his way there to do his weekly commentary. Often this was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he and my mom had a townhouse, and it became a common sight to see the 70-year-old, and then the 80-year-old, and then the 88-year-old Bill Seidman pedaling his old Schwinn bicycle down the street to the local NBC affiliate and to do his weekly broadcast. I have to add a note here. When my father became ill in Albuquerque, my sisters and I stayed at the townhouse. We took turns going up to the hospital to be with him. And one afternoon I decided to ride my father's Schwinn up to the hospital instead of driving. And I have to tell you something, it is a miracle we had him with us as long as we did. The handlebars were crooked, the brakes did not work worth a damn, and when I tried to shift it, both the shifters fell right off the bicycle. My father had a lot of amazing talents, but clearly bicycle maintenance was not one of them. We are honored to have one of the founders of CNBC with us here today. Sue Herrera, who helped to launch the network in 1989, and she was one of the first women to break into the world of broadcast business news, earning her the nickname the First Lady of Wall Street. I'm not sure she loves that name or not. She is the co-host of CNBC's Power Lunch and the host and anchor of CNBC's Special International Series. We are deeply appreciative that she has taken the time out of her incredibly busy schedule to be with us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Sue Herrera.
I'm just going to start out by saying I adored Bill Seidman. I absolutely adored him. He was one of the most exceptional men I have ever met in my entire life. It was a privilege to know him, and in the years that I had the privilege to work with him, I grew to love and respect him even more. He embodied, I guess, so much of what I wish we had more of in this world. He was a man of impeccable character. He was a patriot who loved his country with a fierceness that you rarely see these days. He was a passionately devoted man to his family, and we've heard a lot about all of his accomplishments. Yet for all of that, he was such a humble and unassuming guy. And I thought he was just the light of our studio, and everyone at CNBC just loved Bill Seidman. You've heard a lot about the different aspects of Bill's life, but his television life might be a little bit different than what you've heard before. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes to tell you some of the things that you might not know about Bill through some of the stories that occurred while he was with us at CNBC. Bill and I had some of our best times and our best discussions in the makeup chair, which is something I don't think any of you gentlemen can claim, but it's my claim to fame with Bill. That's where we would meet up, and he would always tease me. He would claim that I was hogging his hair time, and and he would leave the studio and go, I think he'd list a little right there. But that was Bill, you know. He would sit in that makeup chair, and everyone doted on Bill. I mean, Bill had the longest makeup hour of anyone because no one wanted to let him out of the chair. There was a waiting line to get into the makeup chair. And the reason that that's important is because everyone who comes into CNBC has to go through the makeup room. So Bill did a lot of hand-holding, a lot of counseling, and a lot of talking in that room. A couple of times he almost didn't make it on air because he was chatting with people. And one particular event stuck out in my mind. It was when we were in a financial crisis, not this particular financial crisis. I think it was right after long-term capital management, and after that company had collapsed. And we had a money manager sitting in what's called the green room, which is just adjacent to the makeup room. And this gentleman, I was surprised he was even going to go on television because he had lost an enormous amount of client money. And he was sitting on the couch and he had his head in his hands. And he, like the rest of us, we were all very frightened about what was going to happen because there were economies and currencies collapsing around the globe. And Bill went in the other room and he sat down on the green couch next to this gentleman. And he took his hand and he said, "Look, young man, this country has been through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than some greedy idiots on Wall Street to bring us down. This isn't Armageddon. This is opportunity. You're going to be just fine." And he got up, patted the guy on the back, turned to me and said, "I'll see you on TV, beautiful," and walked out the door. And that was so quintessentially Bill. He always took that extra step to help someone else, to give someone counsel, to give someone a hand, to give someone a pat on the back. He always gave everyone a hug when he came into the studio. He was everyone's favorite contributor at CNBC. He was incredibly generous and he was incredibly wise. And that wisdom served him so very well in Washington, where he could always be seen pedaling the bike through the Washington traffic with the backpack. I don't know how he didn't get killed, but he didn't. He made it. He served his country, it strikes me, so selflessly and so passionately and with such patriotism. It was really irrelevant what political party Bill belonged to. because he didn't serve a party. He served his country and he served his president, no matter which party that president came from. And that became crystal clear to me a few years ago, because at that time I was doing a show that required me to go in between Washington and Wall Street quite a bit. And I was extremely naive to the ways of Washington. I had not spent much time there at all, and of course, in contrast, Bill had spent considerable amount of time. Every year in the Capitol, they host a dinner, it's called the Washington Correspondents' Dinner. And it is a usually irreverent evening, and it's presided over by the President and the First Lady, and all of the reporters who cover Washington go to this dinner, and I had heard that it was a very entertaining and interesting evening. I didn't think it was going to be this interesting, but this year it became a decidedly different event. And things were very difficult at this point. President Clinton was in office. It was a difficult personal time for he and the First Lady. And Don Imus, the radio host, or former radio host, I guess, was the MC. Bill happened to be my dinner partner. CNBC and NBC had bought a table together, and Bill had agreed to be my escort for that evening because my co-anchor Ron Insana wasn't able to come. And I was delighted by this because I knew nothing about Washington at that point, especially the big social events, and this is a huge event. So we go into the room is locked down by Secret Service, the evening begins, and I'm thinking, this is terrific. Mr. Imus, however, began his remarks, and they were so off color that they were shocking. And I was stunned. I thought, nobody told me this part of the evening was going to occur, and it was very uncomfortable. So Bill is sitting to my right, and he stands up, and he holds out his hand, and he says to everybody at the table, he says, "We are leaving. You can all stay if you want to stay, but I will not sit here and let this jerk insult my president. You can stay if you'd like, but I will not stand for this." I was just sitting there like this. I was like, oh my God, what the heck is happening? So I take Bill's hand. I'm in my stilettos. He's right here. I'm right here. And we're going to get out of the room, which of course has been locked down by the Secret Service. And I'm thinking, this is going from bad to worse. I'm vowing never to come back to Washington. And I'm thinking, we're never going to get out of this room, and then we're going to have to go back and sit at the table, and I don't want to be here, and I don't want to listen to this. And Bill walked towards this door, and it was like the parting of the Red Sea. The Secret Service moved, the doors opened, and I was stunned. But it was because they knew Bill. And it was because everybody in Washington knew Bill. And it was because everybody in Washington knew what Bill stood for, and because everyone in Washington respected him. And that was the type of man he was. He transcended politics, and in my mind, he really was a true American hero. He was a mentor and a dear, dear man. But as you've heard, he also knows how to have fun. We too were invited to Nantucket and had a wonderful time. One afternoon we had lunch in the town of Nantucket, and then Bill said, "You know, do you like to fish?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I didn't know how to fish. I said, "Yes, I do like to fish." He said, "Good. Have you ever surf casted?" I had no clue. I said, "Sure." My husband, meanwhile, is sitting there going, "What are you doing?" He said, "Come on out to the house." So we go out to the house, which is overlooking the ocean, and he says, "I'm going to teach you how to surf cast, but you can't learn to surf cast without a good rum drink." He fixed me a really good rum drink. I caught no fish. No one caught any fish. The only thing I managed to hook was my husband's hat, which he had pulled down over his head in self-defense because Bill had served me one very large rum drink. Sally had wisely decided to stay on the porch. She knew what was going to happen. And I think that really typifies the two different Bill Seidmans that I knew. The patriot, the man who was willing to stand up passionately for what he believed in, no matter what everybody else in the room was doing, no matter what everybody else was saying. And the other side of Bill Seidman, who loved life, loved his family, loved to have a good time, and loved to have a good rum drink. I know you saw the clip of my colleague Maria Bartiromo announcing Bill's passing on the air. But you should know that when that happened, the viewer calls and the emails flooded our system. So to the Seidman family, you should know that he was loved by people all over the country and all over the world because of his common sense solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems, for his generosity and his great sense of humor. And one email stuck out to me. There were so many, I tried to pull a number of them and looked over them after Bill passed away. But one struck me as so interesting. This viewer wrote in with an email for a question to Bill during this particular financial crisis. As I said, Bill and I have been through a number of them. And he wrote the email not really expecting an answer. So a few days go by, and the phone rang at this gentleman's house, and the voice on the other line said, "Hi, it's Bill." He said he almost fell off his chair. And he said he was so surprised that Bill took the time to call him and answer his questions. And I wasn't surprised at all, because that's who Bill was. Bill always took the time. He always went that little extra inch or little extra mile, whichever way you want to characterize it, to do what he thought was the right thing to do. And I will miss him very much for that. I wanted to thank the Seidman family for sharing him with us for so many years, because we looked so forward to those Thursday dates, and we miss them, and the viewers miss them, and I miss him very much. He was a great man. Thank you, Sally.
I know we've been here for a while, so I'll try to wrap this up. But I did have a couple of things I wanted to say. This is a quote from East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and they're talking about the family patriarch named Samuel. "This can't happen," they were saying. "Father can't be an old man. Samuel is young as the dawn, the perpetual dawn. He might get old as midday, maybe, but sweet God, the evening cannot come. And the night? Sweet God, no. There can't be any world without Samuel. How could we think about anything without knowing what he thought about it first?" You've heard a lot about my dad today. His accomplishments are truly astounding. And as you also heard, one of the most amazing parts of him, I think, is that he had friends all over the world, in this auditorium, on this stage, and he had the ability to make each and every one of them, each and every one of you, each and every one of us feel like we were valued and special, like we were the only other person in the room when he was with us. And those are the times that I remember and that I hold closest in my heart with him. The times when we were together one-on-one, when he took me with him to Europe. When I was about 14, he was on a business trip, and he took me to the racetrack in Italy and let me bet on a horse, and the horse won. And he let me buy a bottle of wine with our winnings. This is in Europe now. And we sat in the hotel room with the window open, drinking the wine, and I got very silly, and I just remember him grinning at me and enjoying, I think, what he had done. There was another trip to Canada. We went canoeing. He insisted that we had to go on a canoeing trip together. So we went up there. The day we got there, it started raining. It did not stop raining for a week. So I remember just being in that tent, peering out at the rain and smelling my father's cigar for 6 days straight. And then there were just the simple times of walking down to Starbucks in Albuquerque with him in the morning to get his morning Wall Street Journal and New York Times, which he had to have every day. So I just want to encourage all of you captains of industry and you future captains of industry and you children of captains of industry to spend time together, one-on-one. Pick up the phone. Don't wait for the phone to ring, because one of these days the phone won't ring, and then you'll just have your memories. I want to close with a reading from Chief Tecumseh of the Shawnee Nation. This was written about 200 years ago. And I was looking for something to read at the family memorial that would talk about him, and I found this, and it really felt like him talking to me. So this will say, I hope, a little bit about how he lived his life, and I think a little bit about how he left us. So live your life that the fear of death can never enter your heart. Respect others in their view and demand that they respect yours. Seek to make your life long and its purpose in the service of your people. Always give a word or sign of salute when meeting or passing a friend, even a stranger. Show respect to all people and grovel to none. And when it comes your time to die, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so that when their time comes they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your death song and die like a hero going home. Speaking for all of my family, I'd like to thank all of you here and everyone up on stage for helping to bring my father home today.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people standing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, and I think to myself, what a wonderful
There is a reception after this. Please join us all at the reception. Thank you.